Hey guys, welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. Of course, I'm Montel Williams, and today I have a guest who's a best-selling author of the book One Red Thread and Fiercely Loyal: How High-Performing Companies Develop and Retain Top Talent. His focus on human behavior and neuroscience has made him the leadership authority on emotional source code and anatomy of meaning. He's a founder and host of the top-rated podcast Leadership and Loyalty. Dov Baron, great to have you back on Free Thinking with Montel, my friend.
Thank you, mate. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Always great chatting with you.
Absolutely. I feel bad today because you're a little under the weather. I can hear it in your voice, but it's okay. And thank you so much for wanting to participate.
This is my Barry White impersonation. You're my first, my last, my everything.
There you go. And you know what? It's really, you're doing a good job of it. Because, I don't know if you know this, but Barry, a lot of people didn't know this, was a very, very heavy cannabis consumer. As a matter of fact, an all-day, 24-hour-a-day cannabis consumer.
Really?
That probably gave him a little bit of extra little help in that throat. You know what I mean?
Well, if it worked for him, that's good.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure how well it worked for him because, he did pass early.
He did.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm glad that we got back together because we wanted to specifically talk a little bit about PTSD. I'd introduce you to a couple of this protocol that I've been involved in. And let's talk a little bit about this because I just did another recent podcast. And it just seems to me that, this is the next pandemic. This is the next thing that is going to hit this world like a freight train.
Yep.
I mean, we're not paying attention to the fact that, as we've come out of COVID, and, if you just look at some of the data that's out there being bantered around and being talked about, the ranges are different almost every day when you hear it. But, I've heard stories about people, anybody who's spent more than 3 days or 2 days in the hospital for COVID, like 60% of them are talking about suffering from, some symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah.
Part of that is because of the fact that, you got to think about it. We put people in hospitals, wrapped them up in plastic, didn't let anybody touch them, talk to them, come near them, had to talk to people through glass walls. And, anybody that you interacted with looked like a spaceman coming in and out of your room.
Yeah.
That's part of it, the nightmare. And then when we look at the, EMS workers, the people who are working in the hospital, those hospital employees. I mean, you have people who literally watch, in some cases, anywhere from 5 to 10, 15 people die a day on their watch.
Yeah.
And these are people that they were trying to help. And so, to just wonder why there's PTSD, I don't think there should be any wonder. And when you think about it from a military perspective, I mean, just recently, there's some information that's just come to bear that shows that we can now identify PTSD and differentiate it from even concussive and traumatic brain injuries using EEG.
Yep.
And in some cases, that EEG is identifying both of them together. And so the hidden, symptoms of war and hidden symptoms that some of our soldiers are dealing with are coming now to bear.
Absolutely.
And so this topic is going to be something that's going to be, I think, apparent over the next 4, 5, 6 years as more and more people start to manifest some symptoms. So let's just start right there as the jump off point for the conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you seeing and what are some of your insights on PTSD?
Well, first thing I want to say is that when the pandemic hit, I contacted every leader that I work with and said, you're going to want to make cutbacks and you're going to want to get rid of me. And that's fine. I understand that. Don't do it. And they said, why? I said, because you're going to need me more than ever. And they said, why? I said, because this will not be the problem. The problem will be the epidemic that follows it, an epidemic of PTSD or something that looks like PTSD. So first of all, let's just take a look at what causes PTSD. Now, of course, we all often think about PTSD as being a military thing, and of course it is, but it's got so many other factors as well. So for instance, human beings, we are tribal, we are relational. you isolate people from others, immediately you've caused a trauma. That's a problem. Then you put people in the hospital and people can't visit them, and then you have people who are dying and you can't get to them. And then, as you said, people who are, you and I know a friend we have in common, who described to me that this is a man who's a surgeon. He's had his hands inside other people's bodies, and he said COVID was full PTSD for him because he watched people die as if they were being suffocated from the inside out. So there's a lot of factors for all these things that are showing up as symptoms, and I think that a lot of people are dismissing it because, well, I didn't go to war and I wasn't raped and I wasn't beaten, but that doesn't mean you're not suffering from very many of the symptoms that are PTSD, and it's
And what
things
does
that,
PTSD mean? It means post-traumatic stress.
right?
So PTS is post-traumatic stress. So what a lot of people don't understand is that not only is a traumatic stress or traumatic incident a psychological impediment,
Yes,
but it causes we're starting to look at and finding biomarkers in the brain that shows that there is a physical manifestation of PTSD that literally writes itself on the amygdala of the brain and also has been identified in lower frequency indications in EEGs or
yes,
QEEGs. So this is something that's physical. Now, in the last 20 years, one of the first lines of treatment or, the most utilized treatment protocol that in the United States that our VAs use is something that's called exposure therapy, and
yes,
we're starting to recognize the limitations of exposure therapy,
yes.
and also recognizing that exposure therapy, it hasn't necessarily done the job that I think the original originators of this or developers of it thought it was going to do. They think that if you take a person and make them relive their trauma by reliving it, it's going to lessen its severity. And that's also a lie. What we're starting to figure out is that if we make them relive it, you actually deeper embed it
Yep.
in the amygdala and, cause it to be kind of hardwired in the brain. So
And
there are some therapies that are out there, but,
but the thing I think that everybody's got to stop and look at first and foremost, because I think you and I talked about this last time. There's so much denial around PTSD, and the reason there's denial of it is because I went through this, whatever this is, and now everything's back to normal. And I always say to people, please understand, you will not suffer PTSD until things are back to normal. That's why it has the P in the front. It's post.
post,
So
correct.
it's only in the moment when things appear to be normal. So the military guy on the battlefield, he's not showing PTSD. He's in that hypervigilant state where his amygdala is on awareness. He's hypervigilant about everything that's going around him because he needs to be. It's a way to survive. But then when he comes back to a normal environment where he doesn't need that and his brain's still firing that way,
When he's going down to the local pub,
right, going
right?
down to the pub or a car backfires or whatever it might be, that's the P, that's the after. So a lot of people who I know very well who managed exceptionally well during the pandemic and all the stress and all the trauma, I was like, you know what, I'm going to keep my eye on you. I'm concerned about you. And they're like, why? I'm great. And I'm like, yeah, now. But when
Right now.
things go back to normal, that's when your brain can go, okay, now we can feel all the trauma. And that's the challenge.
And then unfortunately, we have a something we call a healthcare system that's really nothing more than a sick care system that
Absolutely.
realizes that this is a cottage industry. I got some people who are feeling bad. I can make a lot of money off of this.
Sure.
And so there are a lot of people who are, and I can't characterize it as happy that they have a newfound vertical for financial remuneration,
Yep.
but they love the fact that, hey, this is something that's going to allow me to prescribe a lot of drugs and keep a person tied into some sort of a therapy protocol for years on end
Mm.
when it really doesn't have to be that way. I brought up a protocol with you
Yep.
in our last conversations. It's
Yes.
called RTM,
Yep.
Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, that we've now found to be probably one of the most efficacious protocols out there for treating PTSD, but it's being met with some of the most vehement and adamant resistance that you can think of. I
Of
mean,
course.
those people who have been trying to protect their little fiefdoms and continue to make some money, they have been fighting this to the point that RTM is probably one of the most studied protocols of the last 20 years.
Mhm.
Studied at King's College, studied at Walter Reed, studied by the state of New York, studied by the state of New Mexico, by the state of California, studied. And almost to the letter, we're seeing 9 out of 10 people who have been through this protocol. And in cases of women who have been through the protocol for traumatic sexual abuse or childhood abuse, 9.2 of them,
Really.
92%
Right.
of them are coming out actually ameliorating 100% of their symptoms, which, to me says, why aren't we not jumping on the opportunity right now where we're going to be so over, I think, or inundated with individuals who need therapy in the next 3 to 4 years? At least we ought to start down a path of curing them rather than just putting it aside for a month and then coming back a month later. No, it's time to cure. Stop the stupid.
Yeah, but let's address that, Montel, for a moment because, you know, you're talking about a cure. And the word cure is a threat.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not even allowed to use that term outside of medical. We're not allowed to use the word cure. You're gonna get prosecuted because
Right.
everything that is pharmacological, I mean, it's a it's a it's an industrial complex pharmacology, right? And so if you've got something that is natural, or you got something that some process that actually works, that's a direct threat to, as you said, to that industrial machine, to that money making machine. And so it becomes fringe, even though it's basic and works and is effective. It becomes a fringe because those people will always treat it that way because there's more money in it for us as dealers of the pharmaceutical. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that the battle oftentimes is confronting the idea that this is not a fringe, that, as you said, Walter Reed, et cetera, have all shown that this is highly effective, probably the most effective. And yet you've got to bump up against the bad press. And that's the challenge.
Well, yeah, and I mean, when we're looking at, I think that there's data out there that says right now, this is pre-COVID data that was saying about 6 out of every 10 men, that's 60% of the men,
Yeah.
and 5 out of every 10 women, 50% have experienced at least one trauma in their life. And for women, it's more likely to be an experience of sexual assault or childhood sexual assault. And for men, it's more likely to be an experience of an accident or physical assault, combat, a disaster, or witnessing a death or an injury. So PTSD can happen to anyone.
Well, let's think about what trauma is. So, this is an important quest for people to understand. Trauma is when anything interrupts your normal. So, I want to make this clear so people can really grasp the context of this because it's pretty deep. So, I want you to imagine that Johnny and Bobby are two kids who go to school who are around 10 years old. And when Johnny comes home, his mother always welcomes him with a warm glass of milk and a cookie and asks him, sits down with him, and she's always got her stuff together and she says, "How was your day, honey? And tell me about your day." Now, Bobby comes home exactly the same time as Johnny does from school. He, on the other hand, has an alcoholic mother who is a mess. And she goes, "Where have you been, you little shit?" And she starts shouting at him and she's upset with him. And he just goes to his room. Right. So that's their normal, each of them. And if I say to you, each one of those is traumatic, you might think it's Bobby because he comes home to a drunk. However, now let's change the circumstance and say that now always Johnny's welcomed by his mom and the cookies and the milk and how was your day, and Bobby's always welcomed by the alcoholic and the abuse. But on this particular day, the same day, Bobby comes home and instead of having his mom welcome him, she's drunk on the floor. And the other kid comes home, and instead of having his mom an alcoholic and a mess and shouting abuse at him, she says, "Oh, how was your day, honey?" and gives him a glass of milk. Which one is traumatized? The answer is
Right.
both of them. They're
Right.
both traumatized because their normal got interrupted. Normal got interrupted. So a lot of the time in the treatment of PTSD, what we're trying to do is to return somebody to normal, but what we don't understand is their normal may have been traumatic. So I did a lot of work with one of the treatments that is going on for PTSD involving an injection into the neck.
Right. That's like called a God shot,
Right.
right? Yeah,
And
some people.
one of the things that I warned about is if you're bringing somebody out, somebody who's lived a hypervigilant life, a highly traumatic childhood, and is now in their 40s, and they've lived their entire life in hypervigilance, and you take them out of that, that no hypervigilance is a trauma. So this allows us all to grasp that trauma is everywhere around us. And just because you weren't raped or you didn't see a murder or you weren't out in the battlefield doesn't mean you haven't had trauma. Of course you
Right.
have. So we need, all of us need a lot more compassion around this. And that's why this
Now,
this this system you're talking about is so powerful, because it allows us to come back to a place from a neurolinguistic programming position and say, okay, what is the normal you would want?
right. And now, when it comes to the shot, now I'm seeing something, and this is not a negative. As a matter of fact, I got approached by one of the companies that actually provides this to help to promote this. And I thought about it for a while. I was going to jump on the opportunity, but then I'm starting to hear that, it really only works for about 55 to 60% of people who go through it, because some of those people who go through it end up having a recidivism rate that can be as high as 70, 80%.
Right.
So they have to go and do it again.
Mhm.
And does it really change the amygdala? We don't know. Does it really physically change that hard wiring of that, or does it mask it for a period of time? Again, that's going down the drug
Well,
route.
the
And
research on it shows that it does reset the vagus nerve.
okay, okay,
However, in resetting the vagus nerve, again, that can become a trauma in and of itself. So
right,
now you
okay,
may not be in the original trauma, you're in a new trauma. So I know
right,
people who went through it, and I've worked with them who went through it and were way better for a couple of days, and then they were way worse, and then went, "What happened?" It's because
right,
you've reset the vagus nerve, but you've not undone the trauma. And that's why
right.
it is a combination, and with this treatment you're talking about, it's a combination of resetting it, but also going, "Okay, let's give it a new meaning," because you and I have talked about before, everything comes down to meaning. Everything.
Absolutely. So, my brother, I mean, you got a podcast that's reaching millions, and I'm out here trying my best to grow up and be like you. But how do we get people? How do we get this as a society? Get us. I mean, dude, you'd be amazed. I mean, I spent some time last week at a place that's called the Home Base, which is one of the centers of excellence in the military for looking at hidden wounds
Yeah.
of our veterans. And these guys are trying and doing the best they can. They really are. But I get from the head of it. Well, I do recognize that. I mean, the head of the center himself said, "I recognize that RTM is going to be the future of PTSD.
Yes.
No ifs, ands, or buts. But we can't do anything right now because we're tied to the evidence." It's like so at some point in time, it's like, stop.
Mhm.
Let's move forward.
Yeah.
Why do we have to continue down the path? I mean, they are big proponents of exposure therapy, and they themselves admit to the fact that when they bring troops through, the first couple of weeks the first week is really tough because a lot of soldiers don't want to go through exposure therapy,
No.
and they drop out of it.
Yeah.
And of course, you force them to stay in it, but that didn't necessarily mean you're forcing them to get a cure. So, I'm troubled by how hard it's going to be to beat the naysayers.
Well, I think it's gonna be hard to beat the naysayers for the same reasons as why pharmacology doesn't particularly work, is that it's dealing with what's here right now, and nothing is here just right now. So what I mean by that is I've dealt with lots of military people with PTSD, and and this happened, and they were out in this area, and horrible things they saw. But guess what? That's not the original trauma.
Right.
And that's what everybody forgets. So we're going to treat you because you're in Fallujah and this happened. Yes, that did happen, and yes, that is a horrible trauma, and my goodness, that should have never happened to you. But what's the originating source that set your amygdala off and put you in a hypervigilant state? What is that? Because if we don't treat that, then there's going to be a reoccurrence because that's your normal, the original trauma. So if you do the research, and I know you do, Montel, but for other people, if you do the research, you will find that most of those people who go into those insane environments in the military, they're incredibly traumatized individuals. They grew up with a
before
father
they even go there.
yeah, before they even
Correct.
joined the military. Their father beat the
Right.
shit out of them, their mother was abusive, they had a neighbor was abusive, there's all kinds of other traumas, but they get masked because now I've got the uniform on and now I'm trained to be this and this and this, and then I go into that, and that triggers the original trauma. But we're not dealing with the original trauma. We're dealing with the symptoms. And every time
Right.
we do that, that's like sticking a band aid on, hoping it's going to cure cancer. Good luck.
Right. 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 Or putting a little gum on a dam it's breaking.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, well, and then we also have to deal with the fact that, so often those who are traumatized feel as if, it makes them out to be lesser of a person. And we in society still stigmatize these people and make them feel as if they are, well, if you had a little bit more intestinal fortitude, it wouldn't have bothered you.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The truth of the matter is that there is no shame in this game for anyone.
No.
And until we start to teach the clinicians to approach the person who is suffering differently.
Yes.
I mean, from day one,
Yeah.
they have to be approached. They can't, hit them with, well, do you think you have PTSD? Well, let's talk about it, and then try to make them dig through something that the way we treat it literally re-traumatizes.
Yes. We end up re-traumatizing. It's a very good point. So I was having a conversation with Commander Mark Devine from the SEALs. You probably know
Mhm,
Mark.
mhm. I know who he is.
Wonderful man. And he said, "Do you know the word we all hate?" And he said, "It's the word that is given to every SEAL supposed to have it, and we all hate the word, and it's resilience
Right,
because we're all resilient until we're not.
right.
Like, but as a result
And
of
this
this
new
being
and that term
embedded, it's
resilience
like,
is
well, hide it, hide it, hide it.
right. Well, yeah, and we throw that term resilience around as if, that's the golden star. And we need to stop here for a second
Yeah.
because, I can be resilient in my everyday life for everything that comes in my way.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean the fact that I'm hiding my symptoms of PTSD isn't resilience.
No. It's denial, it's repression, and it's all the things that will actually make your PTSD far worse. So it gets disguised under this cover of resilience, which is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. So rather than saying
Absolutely.
I'm resilient, right? People say things like, I mean, you probably remember this. People say, "Oh, kids are really resilient; they'll be fine." No, those kids are now traumatized. It's not about resilience. Actually, real, true resilience is about dealing what's present in front of you. I'll just tell you a
Right.
quick story that'll give an example of it. As you know, I traveled the world to study with these different spiritual masters, and I spent a lot of time with a Buddhist monk. Now, the interesting thing about this Buddhist monk is he was from my hometown in the UK, but he'd lived in a Buddhist temple just outside of China for 40 years, and I had met
Wow.
him, and so I studied with him, and we went to the temple together, and we walked on meditations and walking meditations. One day we're in the temple, and we're all sitting around, and we're all doing our chants and all the
Hmm.
rest of it, and it's all very calm and it's beautiful. And all of a sudden, he gets up to go light a candle at the front, and I, being a young novice, I got one eye open. I'm having a look just to see what's really going on, see what he's up to. And as I do that, um, I notice that he's lighting the candle and his sleeve catches on fire.
Oh
His
Lord.
sleeve catches on fire. And he says, I don't know whether we can say this and you might have to bleep it out, but
No, it's
he
fine.
goes, fuck, 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 and puts it out. And I,
Uh-huh.
being this naive, um, young student sit down. I'm like, I'm shocked, and I close my eyes, and he sits down, and we carry on meditating. Afterwards, we start our walking meditation, and we're about 20 minutes on into the walk, and I go, I just got to say it, and he goes, what? I said, you're always so calm, and you're always so together, and you're always so clear, and nothing really bothers you. And then your sleeve caught on fire, and he went, fuck, 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 and he said, yes, and I said, I just don't understand why you reacted that way, and he goes, I put that fire out 20
Wow.
minutes ago. He goes,
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I put that fire out 20 minutes ago. It's still burning in your mind. He says, as a
Right.
Buddhist, one of the greatest things you learn is to be present with what's happening so that you can let it go. And what happens with PTSD is we can't be present with it, so we can't let it go. And so we cover it up, we mask it, whether it was something that happened in childhood or something that happened in adult life. We mask it because we want to appear like we've got it all together rather than being like my friend Friar Jessup, who just is present with it wholeheartedly and then moves on. And that's what we
Right.
need to become cognitive of, is how to be present with whatever has gone on, to let ourselves feel those feelings so that we can move past them.
Well, it's very interesting that saying and that idea is so prevalent in what everybody I think needs to stop and think about. That old saying, I was in the right place at the right time. Bullshit.
Mhm.
You should make every place you're in the right place all the time.
Yes.
And by doing so, you do that by being present where you are.
Yes.
It's like our conversation right now. I mean, I've got in the background every now and then little JP, has been barking out, but I can't do anything about that. He's in the other room, and I could distract myself and say, "Hold on a second, let me go see what I can do with my puppy." He's a puppy. Puppies are going to do what puppies do. And so
Exactly.
when I do my podcast, I try to make sure people understand is that every now and then you may hear JP, but okay, so what? It's real. That's what being present is all about. I got him, but it's not just that. It's being present when I go to functions all the time, and people are at functions with me. I spoke at an event a couple months ago at the United States Naval Academy, huge, prestigious thing, and I was receiving but an award that night, and before the award ceremony and before the dinner, they had a little reception and receiving, and I was in a position where of course, I'm a celebrity in the room, so everybody wants to take a picture. So I could have utilized that time period as Montel be the cutout, you know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Be the cutout,
Yes.
or you know, I basically tried my best to be aware of every single person who walked up to me and asked me for a picture. I looked them in the eye, try to figure out where they were
Mhm.
in that moment. Were they just enamored because it's Montel, or was there something that they really wanted to ask me? Was there
Right.
something that they really wanted to say? And I fortunately got an opportunity to meet with every single one of the dignitaries that was there, and one of them happened to be the Secretary of the Navy,
Mhm.
Secretary Del Toro. And when he walked up, I said, no, dude, be fucking present. Excuse my mouth, but be present.
Yep.
Here's a guy who has the ability to put people around him in check and say, if I give him the information, he's a guy that's going to probably be able to ponder what did Montel talk to me about? And this is a what? Okay. So I literally, like I do from time to time, he happened to be there with his wife, and I happened to grab them both of them, not grab them, but I basically said hello by putting my hands on each one of them,
Mhm.
one on each one, her forearm and his forearm. And I said, Mr. Secretary, I can't not take advantage of this opportunity to be here with you at this moment to tell you about something that I'm working on. I'm working on a protocol that is one of the most advanced cures for, not cures, but most advanced treatments for PTSD in existence right now.
Yes.
And he said, what? And I said, yes, sir. I'm working on this protocol. It's called RTM. And I literally, in 45 seconds. I didn't think I had, more than 45 seconds to a minute, but I literally opened up the fire hose and blasted him with everything about RTM. enough that he was like, Montel, we really need to talk. I said, yes, sir, we do need to talk. Now, since that meeting with him, he has literally been present in my life
Mm,
almost
beautiful.
every other week. He'll send me an email, I'll send him one. He literally set up the meeting last week for me and the founder of the protocol at home base, which then turned into we want to use this protocol and we want to try to use it as much as we can. We then left that meeting, went to MIT, and MIT told me about the fact that they want to fund some additional research for us,
Fabulous.
utilizing scans and different forms of scans, especially EEG, to take a look at brain
Yeah,
wavelengths. Because
brainwave function. Yeah,
correct, because now they can figure out whether or not once if they do a baseline with a person, and then we put them through the protocol. In another 2 weeks, they could do another baseline and take a look, and they could actually look at physical manifestation of whether or not this protocol worked as well as we claimed it did.
right.
So, but had I not been present that day
Exactly.
with the secretary, that would have never been asked. And we would not be that much closer, just that much closer to get this accepted at the level that it needs to be accepted, because this is going to be a top down thing. To say you try to deal with the people down here who've been, hunkered down and working with bullshit therapies for the last 30 years. They don't want change. Come on now, you're making me have to learn something new. You're
Mhm.
making me have to do something new. So I got to go to the top and get somebody to push it down people's throats.
I think you're absolutely right, and that it's got to be from both sides. In that, the people who've had the treatment have got to become advocates, and and
And that's starting to
and
happen.
spread the word. But we also need to reach the people who have the authority and influence to say, let's put this into action. And so
Absolutely.
the exposure, the letting people know about it is so vitally important. Like, so how many people, who don't know Montel have heard of RTM? I would
Right.
guess very small amount of people, right? Very
Very,
small.
very, very few.
So,
But
so
even conversations like this one right here,
yeah.
our conversation right here is going to reverberate. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation on another podcast a couple of weeks ago that ended up, garnering for the company a couple hundred people started, emailing and trying to figure out what is this thing Montel's talking about. Well, I think it's just the more and more and more we open up and discuss this in a way that makes people feel as if it's comfortable to discuss themselves.
So let me put it to you, Montel, for the people who are listening. What is the in your mind, what is the major distinction between RTM and something like some other common therapy?
Sure. Well, exposure therapy is the one that is the most common, and
Yes.
that therapy forces the individual to
Relive.
relive that experience
Yeah.
and relive it in such a visceral way that they re-traumatize themselves.
Yes.
That's what I think is
Yes.
happening, and they fight that even while they're in therapy, trying to get beyond it.
Yes.
The thing about exposure therapy, the thing about RTM is that, and I'm going to talk about this in layman's terms, but it basically requires the individual to look at themselves as if they're the projectionist in a movie.
Yes.
What they're projecting is they're projecting their trauma up on the screen. They're not reliving it, they're just presenting it for others to
They're
view.
observing
And
it.
then they're observing it. And while they're observing it, they think of themselves as if they're the projectionist that's letting other people observe their trauma. And then they get a chance to look at the other people's reaction. And in some cases, those reactions aren't as traumatic for the person who's looking at it. So
Yeah.
then they say to themselves, well, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. And then they're looking at it again and saying, well, you know what? I can tell this and present this over and over again. And guess what? It's not re traumatizing me.
Mhm.
And because it's not doing that, that is literally, we do know because, again, trauma is hardwired.
Yes.
So what you're doing is you're basically not breaking that hardwire, but I'm hardwiring something new above it.
Yeah.
I'm hardwiring the fact that, you know what? I can deal with this if I look at it this way. Look at it like it's a movie.
Well, what we know from brain science is neurons that fire together wire together. So when
Mhm.
there's a trauma, that neural pathway is continually firing all the time. However, we also know that neurons that no longer fire together no longer wire together. So what it means is that if you're feeding the trauma over and over and over, and a lot of people do that, not because they're bad people, but because that's just what they do. And so they more deeply embed and create more connections to that trauma. But if you do a pattern interrupt, which is what RTM does, if you do a pattern interrupt that gets them to fire in a different way, there's suddenly an objective step back and you look and you go, oh, huh. Because as you know from my work, ours is the emotional source code and the anatomy of meaning. By having that
Yes.
objective, you then shift into, well, I can give this a new meaning. And it's not even like, oh, well, what is this new meaning? It just becomes a new meaning. It's like, oh, that's not what that is. So, I can, for instance, I can say, my mother was X and Y and Z. And that's the meaning I give it because it was traumatic, but not in an intellectual way, because I can intellectualize it and it doesn't mean a damn thing. The neurons are still going to fire the same way. But when I shift my understanding, when I shift my objectivity to say this, and here's the key I give people all the time is think about it this way. My mother was the way she was. Okay. Would she have been different if she'd have given birth to Montel? Would she have been different if she'd given birth to um, some other famous person? Would she have been different if she'd have given birth? The answer is no. So what does that
Right.
mean? It means it wasn't personal. Wow. That moment of it wasn't personal, it was her trauma playing out on me. And now I'm living that trauma as if it's true, but actually, it's not even my trauma. It's multi generational. And suddenly, I don't have to give it a new meaning. The new meaning just surfaces. Now the neurons are no longer firing together.
This works so well, not just with trauma, but it works so well in making people understand their own individual value. When I say it, what I mean by their own individual value is that there's so many people out here right now. I had a conversation a couple of weeks back with a woman who is doing a lot of work with baby boomers right now to make baby boomers understand that, like me, you're not in your last quarter.
No.
You're in a place in your life where you have an opportunity to continue to excel,
Yeah.
continue to do well. So unfortunately, we have a society that says to us, well, you're 65 years old, retire. Fuck that.
Yeah, I'm with
You
you.
know, why do I got to retire?
Exactly.
And, I mean, I have so much more, I think, not only that I can lean on from my past to share with those in the future, but I also have so much more in my future. I
Yes.
mean, it's really funny. I think about my mind and my mental acuity right now. I don't think I've fired on this many cylinders in my entire life.
Right.
I am so excited about the opportunity every day that I wake up to look at some, not news, but look at something that's happening in the world and read about it and think about it and ponder that and think about what its impact's going to be on tomorrow. Um, and do it from a brain that now has an infinite amount of resource to compare it to.
Yes.
So, you know, and I think that's what is helping to keep me active, helping to keep me firing on the cylinders the way I am, because I'm not buying into the fact that I'm too old to learn. What's that old dumbass thing? Old dogs don't learn new tricks. That's bullshit.
Of course it
Old
is.
dogs do learn. We can learn new tricks
We
if we just open ourselves
Yeah,
up to do
if
so.
we don't, it's very simple. It's my when people ask me my religion, I tell them all the time. You and I talked about this before. My religion is curiosity, right? And if you stay curious, you stay young. Your brain is constantly learning and adapting. And I want to be, my religion is curiosity. I will tattoo that on my heart, my soul, my mind, because the more curious I am, the more I can grow. And so there are people who are old at 25 because they've
Yeah.
stopped being curious. And as long as I'm looking for new ways to understand something or new ways to grow, then of course I'm staying young. My brain is developing because neuroplasticity. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember. I remember clearly that I was told when I was a kid, when I was like in my teens, that the brain you get is the brain you get. It doesn't change. And if you kill the brain cells with drinking or whatever it might be, you're never getting those brain cells back. Well, we know that's complete bullshit. It's
We know
absolutely wrong.
that. Please say that again. It's complete
It's
bullshit. People
absolute
have to
bullshit. We
understand.
have
We
neuroplasticity. The brain is
correct.
growing and changing all the time. The brain you had 10 years ago doesn't have to be the brain you have today. And it can keep growing and can keep developing, but it requires commitment to curiosity. Now, what does commitment to curiosity means? This. Now let's go back to the trauma. In trauma, we say, this is who I am. In healing, we say, this is what happened. There's the
And this is who
distinction.
I can be. Right?
Right?
Yes,
So there's
you're
a
right.
distinction. So the event either defines us or it refines us. So if I allow it to refine me, I say, okay, this shit happened and it sucked. It sucked. But what did it knock off? So if I think about it as I pick up the rock and I push it against the grinding wheel, and all the bits fly off and it sparks and can do all kinds of damage, and it might even crack the rock, but it also can reveal the diamond that's underneath. This is the
Correct.
key, right? So the trauma, quote, the being pushed against the wheel, has revealed the diamond. So I'm no longer defined, but refined by it. And then from that, I can grow. So all the traumas that happened in my life, and I've certainly got, I've got quite a list of them, all the traumas that happened in my life, including falling off a mountain, getting smashed to pieces 120 feet and 12 reconstructive surgeries. If somebody had told me on that day, this is a really great thing and it's going to be really great for you, I'd have punched them in the throat. Right.
Right.
But what I know is over time, because of my commitment to curiosity, because of my commitment to saying, I'm not going to be defined by this, what is this trying to reveal to me? Everything is transformed. And that's the truth with any trauma for all of us.
And, I couldn't echo that even more better than you just said it. I mean, it's kind of like when I laid in a bed 5 years ago,
Mhm.
I had a major hemorrhagic stroke,
Wow.
type of stroke that normally kills most people.
Yep.
I remember, after, the couple of things. One, the first couple of days, I barely remember anything that took place. But after that, because my wife was by my side the entire time. She slept in the bed in the hospital right next to me.
Yep.
And, every day I woke up, I remember seeing her, and it motivated me to recognize that you can't let this thing just be dormant. So, I mean, as much as I could, I took my little phone and I literally, from about the day 4 on, started reading
Yep.
and reading and reading and reading, trying to make this brain work.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And since then, I probably have done as much reading as I did in my entire life
Yep.
because recognize that's what was literally causing new synaptic connections in my brain. And like you have said, helping to keep this brain young,
Exactly.
young enough. And, as I look at my brain, I do have scans at least once a year. Instead of my brain shrinking the way it is, or downsizing, because our brains do
Atrophy.
collapse
Yep.
on its atrophy, mine has really expanded
Yep.
and continues to.
Yep.
And so, therefore, I know that I'm doing the right thing, and any of us can do that right thing. It's like I'm going to go through this, you know, glorious time of my life trying to learn until the day I can't learn anymore. And that'll only be because not because I'm not trying, it'll because maybe, I've hit the end. And then you read recently about the fact that there's some research that's been done that's been proven that they have been able to reverse you see that research that came out a couple weeks ago that they found this chemical that can actually reverse the aging process in mice.
Yes.
They've proven it, they've done it,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be much to extrapolate that to humans.
No. I mean, so we already know that we are likely um, at the speed at which we're developing the neuroscience is it's very likely that we, as in even you and I, who are quote old farts,
Yeah, right.
millennials, boomers rather, that we were expected to die at 70. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Like
Right.
70's around the corner for me. I'm 65. It's like
Correct.
whatever. I'm not that's not gonna happen, and
I,
so
I, I, yeah, you're hitting on this. Let me just say this little point. When I first got diagnosed with MS, I had a doctor look at me and said, well, unfortunately, African American males, you are in one of the worst categories. And, if you look up this information, I'm looking up this information and said that I could have a 15% reduction in my life expectancy. And I'm like, wait a minute, 15%. So when they diagnosed me, African Americans were living on average to 68. So if there's a 15% reduction, that means that I shouldn't be here past 60.
no.
I mean, what past 59?
Yeah.
Well, that's bullshit.
Listen,
I'm not checking out of here right now. And so, yeah,
but this is
the
the
whole
other challenge, right? I mean, and it speaks to what you were saying earlier in profound way, which is the gods in white coats. The god in the white coat tells you this
right,
is going to happen, and you take it on. And I remember when I first started studying um, social psychology, and I remember looking at tribes around the world, and there was these tribes in Indonesia that had never been, had never been approached by a white bloke, and there they used to do a thing which was to point the bone. And that was the medicine man would point the bone, this animal bone, at the person and say, you will die and you'll die within this period of time, like, 7 days. And a perfectly healthy person would drop dead, right? Just drop dead because the God, being their medicine man, told them so. And we in the Western world, we like to make fun of that and go, those primitive idiots. Hold on a second. Your doctor just
right,
told you you've got a year to live.
right.
Bullshit. How many
Where's
people?
his crystal ball?
How many people? Yeah, he's just pointing the bone at you. Right? And so you go, "Oh, I guess I got a year to live." Well, no, that's if you take that on. Listen, I was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis at 18. Most people don't know what that is. It's where the spine freezes and locks in together. The ankyloses, it joins. And so you go into this position. They told me I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 21. Guess what? No wheelchair. I fell off a mountain, got smashed to pieces. Oh, well, you'll never lift weights again. 4 months later,
Guess
I'm
what?
squatting 400 pounds, right?
There you go.
So all these things are their diagnoses, their assessment, but not the truth. But we are socially conditioned to see this as the truth, even though it's not. So whatever your trauma is as you listening to this, yes, they have given you, well, this is good. Hold on a second. Go looking for the anomalies. Go look for the people who have broken all those rules. Look for the people who said, "Nah, I'm not having that. I'm not having
Yep.
that. No thanks." And
And
see what they had.
I also got to tell them, if in fact those in the white coats were gods, none of us would be sick. So,
Yeah, there's
if
only
they,
money to be made if they keep us sick.
yeah, if they can tell you you're dying, why can't they tell you you're living? Why
Exactly.
can't you know what I mean? So stop with the
Well,
stupid,
the old
man.
Chinese model, this is, several centuries ago, was you paid the doctor a shilling a month to take care of
Right,
your family, right? And when you got sick, you stopped paying him.
right.
I like that system much better.
I like that system
Right?
much better
So,
too.
so I only
I
pay
w-
you to keep me, if I'm well.
right. Well, I will give you this though as advice, Dov. I would tell you something. I like you. I used to be a really, 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 really heavy lifter. Heavy lifter. I mean, dude, I there was my best squat in life was 585.
Wow.
I've deadlifted over 600 pounds, and I used to do silly crap. My bench press was never really that big. I got 360, but I mean, but I used to put an enormous amount of weight on my back, and stop with the 400, brother. The
Oh,
older you
I don't
get,
do it anymore.
yeah, let that
I
go
don't I
because
don't
I'm
I don't do any of that anymore, because
good.
one of the things
I mean, I'm still lifting. I'm still
Oh,
lifting,
me
but
too. I still lift, but I
I'm
don't
just
do any of that because one
there
of
you
the
go.
things
I'm
that
doing
I
this.
learned and I teach people is the body is adaptive, and you've got to learn how to work with those adaptations. So I actually teach
Absolutely.
people how to do it in a very specific way. So my biggest leg press was 1,100 pounds. I used to do 1,100 pound
Wow.
leg press.
Yep.
Right now, I would never do a leg press more than about a couple of hundred, and I can get as much out of it. So
Correct.
it's just learning how to do it differently. And of course,
Yep.
when you're
Absolutely.
young, it's you're not lifting weights, you're lifting your own ego.
Sure, absolutely. That's all ego driven. Figuring
Well,
out, ooh, how big, how much size you need.
if you're not
I'm
carrying
scared.
loaves of bread under your arms, you're not doing anything.
Right, right. Absolutely. Well, my friend, I can't say thank you enough for being with me. If there was that one piece of advice you want to leave people with, not only about PTSD, but those who are just trying to make it to the next day, what would you tell them?
Always the same, Montel. Thank you for asking. Always the same. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious, particularly about the things you think you already know. What if you don't know? What if there's a whole arena of information, of knowledge, of insights that you've never even considered? If you don't stay curious, you will get old. So write down something right now that you believe. It doesn't matter what it is. Write it down and then ask yourself why. Why do I believe that? And then when you get an answer, say, well, why do I believe that? And go 5 levels deep. And you will begin a journey into your own deep curiosity, into your own self knowledge. I can't function because this happened. Why? Well, because I was in this environment and that happened. Why? And dig deep, and you'll discover that you are the master of your own ship. You are the one who is determining your own destiny. And sometimes our destiny is determined by passivity of just sitting back and going, well, this is just what happened to me. Bullshit.
Yeah,
Bullshit. You are either
yeah,
defined or you're refined by what happens to you. I'm here to tell you, you're better than that. This is to refine you, to reveal you to you so that you can live your own soul's journey.
absolutely unbelievable. Thank you so much, sir. One of those little things that I do every day, I try to do every day now, is I literally write down, I used to write it, now I just think through it. But before I go to sleep, before those eyes close down for the night, I like to say to myself, what did I do today that's worth talking about tomorrow?
Right.
And
Beautiful.
if people really focused on that, world would be a different place.
Absolutely.
Mr. Barron, thank you so much, sir, for being a part of Free Thinking with Montel. Again, like always, brother, I'd love to have you back. So whenever you want to just chop it up, let's pick a topic and chop it up and see if we can, enlighten people
My
a little bit.
absolute pleasure, Montel. Thank you. Always appreciate you, mate. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the enlightenment that you're bringing to the world. And I appreciate that you're waking people up to a lot of the things that they're not so awake about, including PTSD. So thank you. Thank you for your service to the world.
Thank you, my friend. I'll see you soon. Okay.
I
You
look
take
forward.
care of yourself. Stay well. Hope you feel better real soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into Free Thinking with Montel. And of course, you can always catch me. You go up on every single place that that podcasts are available. I'm there. Leave me a comment or two. I'd love to hear from you. Take care. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please send us your comments.